Hello my friends, I am back and we are going to start reading The Green Glass Sea. So this book, like I said, is historical fiction, and it's set in 1943. Wow, so this is evidence of how much this book has been loved in my family. It's got my sister's middle school testing location library for when she took the SOL. She has since graduated high school, but this is like from 7th grade. So all right, and that just fell out of the book. But anyways, this book the setting is in 1943, and these chapters, I gave them numbers just because that's easier to think about and keep track of, and it fits my little thumbnail image better. But the chapters actually don't have numbers originally. A lot of them are given dates, and they're given a title. So I'm gonna say chapter 1. The book doesn't call it chapter 1, but it's the first chapter, so it's chapter 1. All right, chapter 1, November 15th, 1943, traveling. Dewey Kerrigan sits on the concrete front steps of Mrs. Kovac's house in St. Louis, waiting for her father. He is in Chicago, war work, and she has not seen him since the 4th of July. It's almost Thanksgiving now. She looks toward the corner every few seconds. She's small for her age, thin and wiry, with dark, unruly hair and big front teeth that she's not quite grown into. Her eyes are large and gray-green behind a pair of steel-framed glasses. Her right foot is in a brown shoe that laces up on one side, her left in an ordinary saddle shoe. "Oh, for the love of Pete, will you just come inside?" says Mrs. Kovac. She's opened the front door and stands holding a red striped dish towel in one hand and a glass mixing bowl in the other. "You're going to catch your death out there." Dewey sighs and looks longingly at the wide wooden porch of her Nana's house next door, where she lived until last Friday. "I'm fine," she says. Mrs. Kovac's house smells like sour pickles and sick sweet perfume, and she would rather be a little cold. But she doesn't say this. She doesn't want to be rude to Mrs. Kovac, who has been doing her good Christian duty by taking Dewey in. Or so she tells Dewey every chance she gets. "Well, suit yourself," Mrs. Kovac says with a little huff. Then, under her breath, as if Dewey can't hear her from 5 feet away, she adds, "No wonder poor old Mrs. Galucci had a stroke with sass from the likes of you." She closes the door with more force than necessary to show Dewey she does not approve. But Dewey already knows. Dewey turns to make sure her suitcase is still there. No one else has been on the porch, but it is all she has. One brown suitcase and a Marshall Field shopping bag. She moves the bag a fraction of an inch so its corners line up square with the edges on the top step, and pulls her good wool coat tighter around her. She looks down Hollis Street toward the newsstand on the corner, hoping for a glimpse of Papa's big green Studebaker. 5 minutes later, a car turns the corner. Not a green Studebaker, just a black Ford. She expects it to drive by, but it pulls up at the curb in front of Nana's house. A woman in a green army uniform, a WAC, gets out, looks at a piece of paper in her hand, then up at the house number. She sees Dewey and strides quickly up the walk, tugging at her skirt to straighten it. "Is this the Galucci house?" she asks. Dewey shakes her head. "Next door." "Oh, well, I'm looking for a She looks down at her paper again. "Miss Kerrigan?" "I'm Dewey," Dewey says, and then a little wave of fear makes her stomach flutter, and then not. Why would an army person be here unless something has happened to Papa? "Is Papa okay?" she asks in a voice that trembles, just a little. "What? Oh, no, it's not that, honey," the WAC smiles. "He's fine, just a little busy right now. The war, you know. So they sent me to pick you up. I'm Corporal Beckwith. Margaret." She smiles again. "Is that all your things?" Dewey looks at her suitcase and nods. "Okie dokie then. You say goodbye to your grandmother while I put your gear in the trunk." "Nana had to go to the home," says Dewey quietly. "This is just the neighbor's house." "Oh." Margaret seems startled by the news. "Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to say goodbye to your neighbor then?" "Not really," says Dewey, "but I guess I should." She turns and walks up to the front door, leaving it open a few inches. "Mrs. Kovac, I'm leaving now. Thank you for letting me stay here," she calls down the dim hallway. There is silence, then a muffled response from the kitchen. Dewey waits for a moment, but when Mrs. Kovac does not appear, she closes the door quietly and walks down the steps to the big black Ford. Her suitcase is already in the trunk, and Margaret has come back for the shopping bag. She looks down into it in surprise. "What's all this?" "Just my radio set and some experiments, and a few books." Margaret pulled a stuffed yellow duck from the top of the bag and smiles. "And who's this?" Dewey shrugs. "Einstein. He was a present from Papa when I came from Boston on the bus to live with Nana. I was only 7 then." Margaret puts the bag in the trunk and closes it with a solid thunk. "How old are you now?" She walks around and opens the passenger door for Dewey. 11 next month." Dewey gets in and presses her face to the window to look at Nana Galucci's house one last time. Her coat still smells like Nana, like face powder and cocoa. She wonders how long that will last. "Goodbye, Nana," she whispers to the vacant house. Margaret pulls the car out and they drive away. What time will we get to Chicago? Dewey asks after about a mile. It is already the middle of the afternoon, and that's a long, long drive. She wonders if she will have a nap in the car, if Papa will be awake when they arrive. Margaret frowns. She turns, still watching the road, and talks in Dewey's direction. No one's told you? Told me what? Dewey feels the fear creep back into her stomach like a trickle of ice water. Well, there's been a little change in plans, Margaret says slowly. Your father's not in Chicago anymore. He's working out west. Out west where? Somewhere in New Mexico. I don't know anymore, actually. It's top secret. My clearance is only high enough to pick you up and drop you off. War stuff? Exactly. Your father must be pretty important to have the army send an escort for you. I guess so, Dewey says. She doesn't like this. Everything is changing, and it is all changing too fast. She takes a deep breath. If you don't know where Papa is, how are you going to drive me there? I'm not, honey. My orders are to get you to Union Station in time to catch the 4 o'clock chief. Your ticket's in my pocket. Dewey says nothing. She feels like a package that is being delivered. Her excitement about seeing Papa again has gone away, and in its place is a growing dread of what will happen next. She does not like surprises, and there have been too many this week. She sits and looks out the window, numbly watching the houses of St. Louis turn into businesses as they near downtown. The train station is a huge stone structure that looks like a castle with a tower. Margaret pulls the car up in a line of 20 others. There are people everywhere, hundreds of them, all walking very fast in every direction. Most of them are men, and half of those are in uniform. Dewey stands on the curb and feels very small and alone. Well, here we are, says Margaret. She takes Dewey's things from the trunk and waves a finger in the air. A black man in a gray uniform hurries over. He tips the shiny black brim of his red cap. Yes, ma'am, where to this afternoon? Checking one bag through to Lamy, New Mexico, Margaret says. She hands the man a white envelope. This is her ticket, and 3 meal vouchers. Will you see to it that the porter keeps an eye out for her? Dewey feels even more like a package. I will surely do that, the man says, smiling. He squats down so he is at Dewey's eye level. If I'm going to introduce you, I better do it proper. What's your name, little miss? Dewey, says Dewey. Ain't that a pretty name? Now, let me see. The train for Lamy leaves for track 17 in about half an hour. I'll take you and your valise there directly. He stands up again. You ready? I'm not ready for any of this, thinks Dewey, but she says nothing out loud. Margaret hands the man a $1 bill and looks down at Dewey. The porter will take good care of you. I'm sure your parents will be waiting in Lamy tomorrow afternoon. She pats Dewey on the shoulder. Have a good trip. Well, 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 says the man, picking up her suitcase and the shopping bag. All the way to New Mexico, all by yourself. You're off on an adventure. I guess so, says Dewey. She's not very sure at all. The train is long, shiny, and silver. There's so many people, all taller than Dewey, and the only thing she could see is the back of the man in the red cap. The air is filled with sounds of shouting and talking, of machines and engines roaring, of the metal wheels of trains and luggage carts rolling over rails and cement. If the red cap disappeared right now, Dewey thinks she would be as lost as if she were in a dark forest. Here we are, said the red cap. He hands her ticket to an older man in a fancier uniform, blue with brass buttons. He is also black. All the passengers are white. Eddie, this here is Miss Dewey. She's going to be riding with you all the way out to New Mexico. He tips his cap to Dewey and walks away with her suitcase. You want me to take that bag, miss? Says the new man, Eddie. Am I allowed to keep it with me? Sure thing. There's a rack you can put it up on. I'll just show you where your seat is. He helps Dewey up the steep metal steps and into the train car. A narrow aisle separates 2 pairs of gray fabric seats, each with a wide white napkin across its back. A dozen people are scattered through the car, most of them men reading newspapers. Dewey's seat is at the far end, next to the glass and metal doors that open with a hiss. Nobody's next to you, at least not until morning. You're about as small as a bug in a rug, so you can stretch out and have a nice sleep, says Eddie. Sleep? In all the confusion, it hasn't occurred to Dewey that the train will involve bedtime. She's never slept without a bed, or in the middle of a whole room full of strangers. It doesn't feel safe. Yes, miss. Right after we leave Kansas City, I'll come by with a pillow and a blanket for you. Make this seat up into a nice, comfy bed. Then it's lights out and off to dreamland for everybody. Scoot right in here. Make yourself to home. Dewey climbs into the seat. The fabric is scratchy on the backs of her bare legs under her plaid dress. Her feet do not reach the floor, not by many, many inches. We pull out at 4 o'clock sharp, Eddie says, putting her shopping bag on the empty seat next to her. Dinner service starts at 6. You want me to come take you down to the dining car? Okay, says Dewey softly. Is there anything about the train I can read? She will feel better if she knows some things without having to ask. Eddie furrows his brow and thinks. Best I can do is a timetable. It tells where we're going, when we get there, and a few other things besides. Dewey nods. Eddie tips his cap and is 3 steps away when she remembers something very important. "Mister," she says, and he turns and leans over her seat. "Yes, miss?" "Is there," in a voice that is just barely above a whisper, Dewey asks, "is there a bathroom?" "Why, yes, miss. Up by the front there, where we came in. Commode and a sink." "Thanks. I can—" Dewey stops in mid-sentence in a small panic. "I don't have a toothbrush." "Didn't nobody pack one for you?" "Nobody packed me except me," Dewey says. "I have a toothbrush in my suitcase to take to Chicago, but now I'm not going there because the war moved my papa again." She always brushes her teeth before bedtime. Now there is no order, no routine, nothing familiar at all. Eddie makes a clucking sound with his tongue. "That's a shame," he says. "This war is shaking up families all over. I see it every day." He smiles down at Dewey. "But at least I can find you a toothbrush. You just sit tight." He tips his cap again, then hurries to help a woman with 2 large hat boxes. When the train pulls out of the station, the car is about half full. Dewey can't see any faces, just hair and hats over the seat tops. She watches out the window as the backs of downtown buildings roll past, dirty brick and stone with ash cans and piles of wooden crates stacked up on loading docks. When the buildings turn into farmland, she takes a book out of her bag and begins to read. It is called The Boy Mechanic, and she is reading a chapter about building radios. Her fingers itch with the urge to have all the parts in front of her, to pick them up and put them together the way the book shows. They're in her bag, but there's no place to spread them out, except on the seat next to her, and she's afraid the tiny pieces would get lost. Instead, she reads about how they will work, and soon she is absorbed in a world of facts and diagrams, a world with very few surprises. At 6 o'clock, Eddie comes back. He hands her a timetable and a red plastic toothbrush, still wrapped in crinkly cellophane. "You ready for some supper?" he asks. Dewey nods, her stomach growling. The cheese sandwich Mrs. Kovac made her for lunch seems like it was years ago, in another life. The dining car is very fancy, with real silverware and white tablecloths. It is noisy with people laughing and talking, the clatter of knives and forks, and the tinkling sound of ice cubes in glasses. The table is too tall, but the waiter brings her a thick cushion to sit on. She orders the pork chop. At home, Nana mostly made red sauce spaghetti because their meat ration coupons only allowed for chicken on Sunday. The waiter brings her a basket of hot rolls and a Shirley Temple cocktail, pink and bubbly with ginger ale and lots of cherries. She's sorry she didn't bring her book because she's bored eating all alone. She reads the timetable twice. At least it is words. The pork chop is very big and she can only eat half, but the waiter brings her a chocolate sundae anyway, with nuts and a cherry. It has been a long time since anyone has given her a treat, and she lingers over it, smiling down to the last spoonful. When she's through, the clock says 7 o'clock, too early to go to sleep. Dewey is tired of just sitting. She decides to explore, just a little. It is strange to walk through rooms that are moving. The train sways and rolls from side to side. She has to concentrate to keep her balance. In between cars, the noise of the wheels in the wind is much louder. The first 2 cars look like her own, with different people. Not very interesting. If the next car is just more people, she will go back to her seat and read. But the next car is different. A sign on the door says observation car. Maybe she will be able to see the stars. She opens the door and walks into a long, smoke-filled room. 20 or 30 people, men and some women, are sitting in armchairs around the edge of the car, not in rows and aisles. They're smoking cigarettes and drinking cocktails and talking very loud. In the middle of the car, a fat man with a yellow tie suddenly bursts into laughter and slaps his pinstripe thigh. Dewey stands near the doorway, pressed against the wall where she won't be in the way. Round tables with ashtrays in their centers are scattered among the chairs, their shiny chrome surfaces covered with glasses and packs of Camel cigarettes and the bullseyes of Lucky Strikes. Large windows line both sides of the cars. It is dark outside, so all she can see are the reflections of the talking people. The end of the car is a curve of windows from floor to ceiling. Dewey wants to go and look out, but it is too crowded. She turns to leave just as the fat man gets up. He's been sitting next to a radio, a big wooden cabinet radio with black knobs and a glowing yellow dial. Dance music is coming out of it, which means that it works, even on a moving train. Dewey smiles. Maybe she will come back and try out her own radio in the morning, when it's too early for cocktails. It is almost finished, and she's been wanting to test it for a week, but Mrs. Kovac didn't approve of girls building things and was always watching. The timetable says the train will stop in a place called La Junta at 6:50. She isn't sure where it is, even what state, but if it has a train station, it might have a radio station too. Dewey whistles softly under her breath as she walks to the car. She feels better having a plan. Back in her own seat, she reads the timetable again to make sure about La Junta, then returns to her book. When they pull into Kansas City at 9:30, it is snowing. A gust of cold air blows through the car and the doors open. She watches the flakes fall through the cones of yellow light cast by the lampposts of the station. The train stays in this station for an hour, So Dewey brushes her teeth in the little steel sink in the bathroom and gets ready for bed. She takes off her shoes, leaving her socks on in case her feet get cold in the night, and hopes her dress will not be too wrinkled in the morning. She doesn't want Papa to think she is sloppy. He will probably understand because of the train and the war. When she returns, Eddie has tipped both seats back into the reclining position and laid out a bed with a white pillow and 2 cream-colored blankets that say Santa Fe on them in red letters. The blankets are a little scratchy, but warm. Dewey takes her glasses off and tucks them inside her saddle shoe, sliding it under the seat. The train pulls out of the station, and 5 minutes later, all the lights go out except for a line of dim blue bulbs near the floor. In the darkness, Dewey reaches down and pulls Einstein from her shopping bag, uncovering a packet of letters from Papa. She strokes one envelope with a fingertip, then cuddles the soft yellow duck tightly under one arm and burrows under the blankets. The wheels of the train make a steady, soothing chuk-chuk-chuk sound, and soon she is fast asleep, rolling west across the dark prairie. The sound of a man's loud snoring wakes Dewey up. She lifts the corner of the window shade. It is not quite morning, but light enough to see shapes outside, low hills and a few scattered trees. She puts on her glasses and lopes to the bathroom in her bare feet. Men are sleeping sitting up, their ties loosened, their hats tilted down over their faces. A few are awake, rubbing their eyes and grumbling in their blankets, but the car is quiet. Dewey doesn't know how long people are allowed to sleep on the train, if there will be a bell to start the day, like school. Now is a good time to go to the observation car to test her radio if she wants any time alone. She puts on her shoes and then, as quietly as she can, picks up her shopping bag by its twisted paper handles. The bag crinkles and she freezes, holding her breath for a minute, then walks very cautiously, heel to toe, out of the car of sleeping people, holding the bag out from her body so it will not make noise. She's used to being quiet in the morning, because Nana is always cranky until she's had her coffee. The observation car is completely empty. Dewey smiles and opens the blue curtains covering the long windows at the end. They're traveling west, so the back of the train faces east, where they have been. The tracks seem to emerge in 2 unending lines from underneath the train. The sun is just peeking over the horizon, and the light in the car is reddish gold. Everything is quiet and still, except for the sound of the train wheels, which she is getting used to. She sits on the carpeted floor of the car, between a half circle of armchairs and the windows, and carefully arranges the pieces of the radio around her. The chrome tables are big enough for cocktails, but not for setting up an experiment. She opens the Boy Mechanic and weights the book flat with the edge of the bag so she can read with both hands free. The radio is inside a wooden cigar box, so its delicate parts won't get wrecked inside the shopping bag. She lifts it out and sets its wooden base, the lid from another cigar box, flat on the carpet. A round blue paper Morton salt container, wrapped around and around and around with copper wire, is screwed onto the base. The wire is wrapped so tight and close together, it looks like the bottom of the cylinder has been corrugated with metal pennies. Wires dangle from the top and bottom of the cylinder, and bolts and screws dot its wooden base. A metal arm, canted out from a slender post like a tiny fishing pole, ends in a minuscule whisker of wire suspended over a lump of a dark gray mineral. Dewey stares at the diagram in the book, then winds the bottom end of the copper wire tightly around the bolt holding the metal arm. She looks back and forth between the book and the radio on the floor and tests a few connections with her fingers. Then she pulls a single black Bakelite earphone out of her bag and winds the last inch of bare wire from its brown fabric-wrapped cord around another bolt. She holds the earphone up to one ear and listens. Nothing. She peers intently at the picture in the book, then back at the radio. It looks right. She wishes she knew what time it was, how close they are to La Junta. She looks out the window. The landscape shows no sign of civilization, just flat brown plains with mountains in the near distance. She sighs loudly. "Oh," says a voice from behind her. "Sorry, I thought I had the place all to myself. I didn't see you down there." Startled, Dewey drops the earphone and turns around. Sitting in one of the armchairs along the wall is a slender young man in brown pants and a very wrinkled white shirt. He's reading a copy of Life magazine with a general on the cover. A lock of curly dark hair hangs over one eye. He's smiling, a kind of silly grin, and needs a shave. He stands up and looks over the chairs to see what Dewey is doing. "Ah, The Boy Mechanic," he says. "One of my favorite books. A little dry, but very instructive. I built my first radio from it, except I used an oatmeal box. Can I take a look?" Dewey nods, and the man moves one of the chairs out of the semicircle and steps carefully into the makeshift laboratory that Dewey has created on the carpet. He squats back on his heels and examines the radio. "Nice work," he says after a minute. "That's a beautifully wrapped inductor coil." "Thank you," says Dewey. She feels pleased by the compliment, because he knows what he's talking about, even if he looks like a bum. Except it doesn't work. The man looks at the radio again and snaps his fingers. "Ah, I see your problem. You haven't hooked the coil up to the aerial wire." So I'm not getting any signal, Dewey says slowly. Or any power. None at all. He looks out at the desolate landscape. No guarantee there's anything out there to get, but we can try. Do you have more hookup wire? Dewey reaches into a crumpled brown paper bag and pulls out a metal reel of thin, cotton-covered wire. She hands it to him. Perfect. We'll need about 20 feet. He takes out his pocket knife, unrolls a length of wire, cuts it, and hands the reel back to Dewey. Do you know how to strip the ends? Yes. Great. Here. He turns the knife around in his hand and gives it to her, handle first. Dewey scrapes the black cotton off each end, leaving an inch of bare silver wire. It wraps around here, right? She says, pointing to the dangling bit of copper wire at the top of the coil. The man nods, and she wraps the silver and copper wires together like two tightly entwined snakes. Excellent, he says. He looks around. Now, if we were in a house, our best bet would be to run the aerial out a second-story window, but I don't think these open. He taps on the glass. Still, reception is better through window glass than metal train sides. He stands up and pushes the loose end of the long wire through a curtain loop. The silver metal rests against the glass a few inches from the ceiling of the car. Give it another listen. Dewey holds the earphone up to her head. I hear static, she says excitedly. Good. Something's working. He looks down at the radio. You don't have a slider on this one, so you can't really tune it, but try moving the cat whisker around on the crystal. See if you can pick up anything else. Dewey extends a finger and gently moves the little fishing pole around, a tiny fraction of an inch at a time. After a few minutes, she shakes her head. Just fuzz, she says. She looks out the window again. Do you know if there's a radio station in La Junta? She pronounces the hard J. He smiles. La Junta. It's Spanish. But no, I don't know for sure. He looks at his watch. We're only 10 minutes out from the station. You'd think if they were broadcasting, we'd pick something up. Maybe it's just too early. Maybe, Dewey says slowly, thinking. I know how we can find out. How? She points to the cabinet radio in the center of the car. That one has a tuner. If we can find a station, then we know there's a signal, and we'll know what to listen for. Brilliant, says the man. Let's do it. Are we allowed to turn it on? I see no signs or armed guards. They grin at each other like co-conspirators and approach the big radio. He turns a large black knob and the set begins to hum. The yellow dial in the center glows faintly, then brighter as the tubes warm up. Start at the high end and work down, he says. He slouches into the chair next to the radio and cocks his head, listening. Dewey turns the dial. The cloth-covered speaker of the big radio pops and hisses with static, and once they hear a faint hint of what might be voices, they won't come in any better than a faraway whisper. She gets all the way to the other end of the dial without finding a clear station. Nothing out there, she says, turning off the radio with a sigh. I'll have to test mine some other time. Thanks for helping me. Sure thing. Let me unhook you. He gets up and removes the long wire from the curtain, wrapping it in a neat coil around his feet before handing it to Dewey. A neat coil around his fist before handing it to Dewey. She tucks it between the salt canister and some bolts, and then puts the radio back into the cigar box as the train begins to slow down. La Junta, Colorado, right on schedule. It's 6:49 Mountain War time, the man said, looking at his watch again. I guess you'd better scoot on back. Your folks are probably up and ready for breakfast by now. I don't have any folks, said Dewey. Not on the train. She closes the boy mechanic and slips it sideways into the shopping bag. You're all by yourself? The man sounds surprised. How far are you going? Dewey puts the wire back in the paper sack. The next station, Lima, New Mexico. Really? The man smiles. Me too. Is that where you're from? No, my papa just moved someplace around there. I don't know where yet. What kind of work does he do? He used to teach math at Harvard before the war. Now he's doing some kind of secret stuff. I don't know exactly what. Dewey shakes her head. Well, 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 says the man. I did my undergrad work in Cambridge, at MIT. Small world. What's your dad's name? Dewey Kerrigan. Dewey looks up and is puzzled to see the man is grinning as if he just won a prize. What? She asks. I know Jimmy. I met him at a party last month. We got to talking about codes and puzzles, and he gave me a dandy. He pulls out his hand. Looks like you and I are going to be neighbors at a place we call The Hill. I'm Dick Feynman. I'm Dewey, says Dewey, shaking it. Dewey Kerrigan. Where is The Hill? Up in the mountains a bit. Dick waves his hand at the landscape beyond the window. You'll see in a few hours. But hey, now that we're properly introduced, do you want to have breakfast with me? I'm dying for a cup of coffee. Will there be pancakes? Dewey loves pancakes with syrup. Nana mostly made her oatmeal. They were on the menu last time I took the chief. Dewey looks around to make sure there aren't any radio pieces left on the carpet and thinks about breakfast. Nana said never to eat food from strangers, but since yesterday there have been nothing but strangers, and Dick has introduced himself and knows Papa, so it's probably fine. She hopes so, because she would like to talk more about radios. Okay, she says. They walk back through the train toward the dining car. So what do? Do you teach math too? She asks when he pauses to open the door between two cars. Dick looks around, then shakes his head. No, physics, he says in a low voice. There's no one else around, but I can't talk about what I'm doing now either. It's secret, right? She sighs. She's tired of the war. Everything interesting is a secret. Yeah, afraid so, he says. It has to be. He opens the door and motions her to go through. Dewey nods silently and wonders just what Papa has gotten himself into. Alright, so I'm going to stop this video here, but I'm not going to stop reading. I'm going to pick back up. Chapter 1 is really long, and I don't want it to take like 2 years to upload this video to YouTube. So I'm going to upload part 2 of chapter 1 at the same time, so you'll be able to watch them both in a row. But yeah, I just don't want this video to be so long that it breaks my phone. Alright, bye guys, see you in a minute to read the rest of chapter 1.